So can we begin, Professor Vidyasagar? Okay.
Yes, certainly.
So hello everyone, and welcome to the 27th Gonitswara webinar. We have the privilege and honor to have with us Professor Mathukumali Vidyasagar, Fellow of the Royal Society, who is one of the four Serb National Science Chairs in the country and Distinguished Professor of the Indian Institute of Technology, Hyderabad. Thank you, sir, for accepting our invitation and agreeing to give this webinar. Before beginning this webinar, I would like to mention a few things. First, if your connection is lost, then you may watch the live telecast of this webinar on our Facebook page. Use the chat option to send any questions that you may have to Hridayananda or to me, who are the moderators of today, and we shall ask the question to the speaker either during the talk or after the talk during the question and answer session. Let me introduce today's speaker. It is a difficult task to introduce today's speaker, but I shall still make an attempt at doing it. Professor Vidyasagar is a distinguished professor in electrical engineering at IIT Hyderabad and the Cecil and Ida Green Chair of Systems Biology at the Eric Johnson School of Engineering and Computer Science, University of Texas at Dallas. He received his BS, MS, and PhD degrees in electrical engineering from the University of Wisconsin in Madison in 1965, 67, and 69 respectively. Between 69 and 89, he was a professor of electrical engineering at Marquette University, Concordia University, and the University of Waterloo. He then returned to India as the director of the newly created Center for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics in Bangalore under the Ministry of Defense, Government of India, where he worked under Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. In 2000, he moved to the private sector as an executive vice president of Tata Consultancy Services, where he stayed till 2009 before returning back to academia. Since March 2020, he is a Serb National Science Chair, one of four in India. Professor Vidyasagar's research interests are in the broad area of system and control theory and its applications. In the recent past, he has been interested in the area of compressed sensing, that is finding sparse solutions to large undetermined problems. At present, he is exploring whether ideas from statistical learning theory can be applied to problems of reinforcement learning. On the applications front, he is interested in applying ideas from machine learning to problems in computational biology with emphasis on cancer. Professor Vidyasagar has received a number of awards in recognition of his research contributions, including Fellowship of the Royal Society, the IEEE Control Systems Technical Field Award, the Rufus Oldenburger Medal of ASME, the John R. Ragazzini Education Award from the AACC, and others. He's the author of 13 books and more than 150 papers in peer-reviewed journals, which include Nonlinear Systems of Analysis, Classics in Applied Mathematics, CM. He also has an Erdős number of 2 and an Einstein number of 3 with his joint papers with his father, Professor M.V. Subbarao, a great Indian mathematician. Uh, Today he will talk about Ramanujan graphs and the matrix completion problem. Over to you, Professor Vidyasagar, and I have a small request. If you can begin by mentioning some you've had a long association with Dr. Kalam, so if you can mention some anecdote, maybe. Thank you.
Oh, that. Well, in terms of anecdote, I would actually suggest people to look at my website, where I have written a couple of articles. I wrote one article in 2002 when Dr. Kalam was nominated to be the president by the then NDA government. I'm just going to put a link in the chat box. I hope everybody can see it. Let's just see. Where is the chat? So this is the website, and if you go right to the bottom, I mean, I can share the screen. I hope I can share the screen. Chrome tab. Okay. So if you go right to the bottom, there are a couple. I mean, the font is a bit small, but I hope you can see it. This next to last bullet says article reminiscing about Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, dated 22nd June 2002. That was just after the NDA government of Prime Minister Vajpayee had nominated him to be the president. There are a lot of anecdotes there. And then this one, where I have put the cursor, it says my tribute to President Kalam on his untimely passing away in July of 2015. There are a few more anecdotes there too. I would like to suggest that you can go and read them. Let me just stop sharing here. But it was certainly my privilege to have known him. I first met him in 1985, and I knew him right up until 2015 when he passed away. So that is a period of 30 years, and very inspirational figure. There are, of course, some idiots who don't like him. I have no sympathy for those people at all. Some of the young people who are joining should at least try to read some biographies of him, which are available, and you can read the writings that I mentioned. So let me start the lecture. I see two old friends, Professor Ajit Iqbal Singh and Professor B.V. Rao. So they will find this talk utterly elementary, but I was told that the audience primarily consists of undergraduate students. So that is how I prepared this talk. Okay. So I hope you can all see this presentation. It says Ramanujan graphs and the matrix completion problem. Can you just confirm that you can see it?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So
Yes, sir.
The talk is slightly lopsided in the sense that about 80% is going to be Ramanujan graphs and about 20% is going to be the matrix completion problem. Primarily because if I gave a lot of details about the matrix completion problem, the talk would go way over 1 hour and we don't want that. So here is an outline of the talk. There are 4 major parts. First is Ramanujan graphs. What are they? Second is construction of Ramanujan graphs. Third one is Ramanujan bigraphs. I will tell you at the appropriate time what is the distinction between a Ramanujan graph and a Ramanujan bigraph. And the last section is the matrix completion problem. In particular, I'm going to talk about a very interesting research problem which I call fault-tolerant Ramanujan graphs, which the mathematician hadn't really thought about, but they arise very naturally when you apply them Ramanujan graphs in engineering applications. So let's start with Ramanujan graphs and basic graph theory. Now, I was a little bit surprised when the organizers told me that the audience may not know what a singular value of a matrix is. So here is a 1-slide introduction, and I would strongly urge everybody to educate themselves about singular values. They are at least as useful, if not more so, than eigenvalues, which everybody knows. So suppose you have an m by n matrix, and just to be clear, I'm going to assume that m is smaller than n, so that you have more columns than you have rows. Okay. So the idea of the singular value decomposition is that you can find 2 matrices U and V. U is a square matrix because I've assumed m is smaller than n, and V is a rectangular matrix. And the columns of U and the columns of V are orthogonal. That is what this relationship says, where I put the cursor. And the original matrix M can be expressed as a linear combination of the columns of U multiplied by the transpose of the columns of V, which means the rows. You can easily see each one of these is a rank 1 matrix of dimensions m by n. So singular value decomposition says that you can write the given matrix as a sum of rank 1 matrices. And these numbers sigma 1 through sigma m, they are the eigenvalues of the matrix mm transpose, which is an m by m matrix. They're all non-negative. They don't have to be positive. So if the matrix M has rank less than m, then some of the singular values will in fact be 0. And why do engineers study singular values? Because any matrix that you measure will have imprecisions in the elements, and singular values are far less sensitive to errors in measurement than eigenvalues. Okay? So quite apart from my talk, you should educate yourself about singular values if you don't know what they are. So let's start with some basic graph theory. So a graph is an ordered pair. You have a set V which consists of vertices, and then E which consists of edges, and the edges are a subset of V cross V. So you can think about the first, so every element of E is a pair which looks like Vi Bj, and you can think of this as an edge from Vi to Vj. Now if the edge set has the property that whenever there is an edge from I to j, there is also an edge back from j to I, then this graph is said to be undirected. The graph is said to be simple if there are no self loops. That means there is no edge from a vertex back to itself, and there are no multiple edges between any pair of vertices. So that means that between any pair of vertices, there is at most one edge. And a simple graph can be directed or undirected, but in my lecture today, I'm going to be talking only about undirected graphs. So the next important concept that we need is the notion of a bipartite graph. So if you can partition the set of vertices as a disjoint union of two vertex sets, VR, R stands for rows, and VC, which is for columns, such that there are no rows between two vertices in V. I apologize, that these V's should are in the wrong font. They should be this calligraphic font, but anyway, you get the idea. So there is no edge between two vertices in VR, and there is no edge between two vertices in VC. So all edges are only between VR and VC. So like this picture, you think about VR being one set of vertices, VC being another set of vertices, and there are no edges here, there are no edges here, and all edges are only going from one side to the other. That is what is called a bipartite graph. And if the two sides have the same number of vertices, the bipartite graph is said to be balanced. And if it is not the case, the bipartite graph is said to be unbalanced. So you've seen the slide already. So now for a graph, you associate what is called an incidence matrix. So an incidence matrix is a matrix whose elements are 0 or 1, and the size of the matrix is the number of vertices by the number of vertices. So both the number of rows and the number of columns equals the number of vertices. And the way you define this incidence matrix is, if there is an edge from I to j, then the corresponding element aij is equal to 1. If there is no edge, then a sub ij is equal to 0. So you can see that in an undirected graph, the matrix A is a symmetric matrix. But you can talk about incidence matrices even when you have directed graphs, even though I won't be doing it in today's lecture. Now, what happens if you have a bipartite graph? Well, then the incidence matrix looks like this. There is a matrix B whose number of rows is the cardinality of the set V sub R, and whose number of columns is the cardinality of the set V sub C. And that's why I choose these symbols VR and VC. And this matrix B has a 1 if there is an edge from a vertex in VR to a vertex in VC, otherwise it is 0. So this is called the bi-adjacency matrix. So what does the full incidence matrix look like? Well, you can see it looks like this. Okay, 0 B transpose 0. So this special structure of a bipartite matrix is very important as we go forward. Now, in the context of Ramanujan graphs, a very important concept is called regularity. We'll say that a graph is d-regular if every vertex has the same degree d. Okay. And we will say that a bipartite graph is dr/dc biregular if all the vertices on one side have the same degree and all the vertices on the other side have the same degree, but the two degrees need not be the same. In fact, you can see this relationship has to hold. The row degree multiplied by the number of row vertices has to equal the column degree times the number of column vertices. You can see that from here. If you take the cardinality of this set, and if each one of these vertices have the same degree, then dr vr is the number of edges going out, but everything that goes out has to land here. So that means that dr times the cardinality of vr has to equal dc times the cardinality of vc. So this tells us something about the eigenvalues and the singular values of the incidence matrix. So suppose you have an unconnected d-regular graph, and let A denote the adjacency, sorry, that should be adjacency matrix. Suppose A is the adjacency matrix, not graph, of an undirected d-regular graph. So we can order the eigenvalues in decreasing order of magnitude. And remember, A is symmetric. So all the eigenvalues are going to be real numbers. So we can order them like this. Now, it turns out that each of these eigenvalues is going to be between plus d and minus d. So what is d? D is the index. That means the regularity index of the graph. Every vertex has the same degree d. And how do you see this? Well, suppose you take a vector of all, yes? Any question? No. Okay. Suppose you take a vector of all ones, okay, and multiply by A. So what do you get? Each row of A has exactly d ones. So if you multiply A times the column vector of all ones, you will get back d times the column vector of all ones. So this shows that d is always an eigenvalue. Now what you can show, I didn't put it in the slide, that if this second eigenvalue is also equal to d, then that means the graph is disconnected and it is in two pieces. More generally, the multiplicity of d as an eigenvalue of the A matrix is the number of connected components of the graph. But because we have assumed that we started with a connected graph, this has to be a simple eigenvalue, which means the second largest eigenvalue has to be strictly less than d. And the other interesting point is, what is this lambda sub n, the smallest eigenvalue? Not smallest eigenvalue by magnitude, just the smallest eigenvalue algebraically. That smallest eigenvalue is equal to minus d if and only if the graph is bipartite. So you can tell a lot about the nature of the graph by just looking at the eigenvalues of the A matrix. So what happens if the matrix is bipartite? I'm sorry, if the graph is bipartite? Well, we know the adjacency matrix looks like this. So what do the eigenvalues of this matrix look like? Well, just do a simple mental exercise. Suppose this is 0, 1, 1, 0. Okay? What are the eigenvalues of the 2 by 2 matrix 0, 1, 1, 0? They are going to be plus 1 or minus 1, right? And essentially the same sort of a statement is true in the general case as well. Remember, we have a bi-adjacency matrix B when you have a bipartite graph. And the dimension of the bi-adjacency matrix is the number of row vertices and the number of column vertices. So B doesn't have to be a square matrix, even though A is always a square matrix. So you look at the singular values of B, which are always non-negative numbers, and it turns out that the eigenvalues of A are plus minus sigma 1, plus minus sigma L, where these sigmas are the singular values of B. And because the matrix A is always square, sometimes you will need a few more extra zeros to pad out the spectrum. But this is the most important result. We had this statement that D, if you have a D regular graph, then D is also the largest eigenvalue. So what is the analog of that for bipartite graphs? You take the square root of dr times dc, and that is the largest singular value. So in particular, if the bipartite graph is balanced, which means the same number of vertices on both sides, then dr has to equal dc, which equals some number d, and then the largest singular value of b is also going to be that same d. Notice that this doesn't have to be an integer in general. Okay. Here, the largest eigenvalue is always an integer because it is the degree of all the vertices. Here, this is square root of dr dc, so it doesn't have to be an integer. So this is all about background material on graphs. So now let's talk about Ramanujan graphs and Ramanujan pi graphs. So suppose you take a D-regular graph. We have already seen that the largest eigenvalue is D. So we don't worry about the largest eigenvalue. We look at the second largest eigenvalue. And we define this graph to be a Ramanujan graph if the second largest eigenvalue is no larger than 2 into square root of d minus 1. Okay. Now let's try to understand this definition. So there are two questions. One is, why this strange bound? What's so special about 2 into square root of d minus 1? Why not some other number? And second question is, even if this bound holds, why is it called a Ramanujan graph? So I can answer why this bound, but I can't answer why this is called a Ramanujan graph. That terminology was coined in a paper published in 1988, and I will talk about it a little bit later. But the answer is not elementary. So you just have to go and read that original paper if you're interested. But now let's get back to the original question. We call this graph as a Ramanujan graph if the second largest eigenvalue satisfies this bound. So what's so special about this bound? So in 1986, this particular bound was proven by two people, Allam and Boppana. And what did they prove? They said, suppose you take any D-regular graph with n vertices, okay? And you let n go to infinity. So that means you take a graph with n vertices, fix the integer d, but make the number of vertices increase more and more and more. Then they showed that the lim inf of the second largest eigenvalue is always greater than or equal to 2 into square root of d minus 1. So what is the consequence of this? Remember, we have said nothing about the graphs here other than that they're deregular and the size is becoming larger and larger. Other than those two statements, there is no restriction whatsoever on these graphs. So this Allam-Boppana bound says, take the contrapositive. It says it is impossible to construct an infinite series of graphs with increasing size such that the second largest eigenvalue is bounded away from this number on the lower side. It can be bounded away on the upper side, but it cannot be bounded away from this number on the lower side. Because as you keep making the graphs bigger and bigger, some subsequence of the graphs will have their second largest eigenvalue, either converging to this number or exceeding this number. So I hope that point is clear. It's a direct consequence of this lim-inf definition. So what this says is this bound is in some sense very tight. You cannot make this number smaller than this and ensure that infinitely many graphs will satisfy this bound. So this is a very tight bound. So any graph that satisfies this bound is called a Ramanujan graph. So this is very old, as you can see, 1986. What about bipartite graphs? That came much, much later. In the previous slide, I said Ramanujan graph. Here I'm saying Ramanujan bigraph. So I'm using bigraph to mean bipartite graph just because it's shorter. That's all it means. So suppose you have a bipartite graph and it is dr dc biregular. So one side, every vertex has degree dr. The other side, every vertex has degree dc. Then we call it a Ramanujan bigraph if the second largest singular value of the bi-adjacency matrix satisfies this bound. Now, I would just like to remind you of one fact. The largest eigenvalue of the bi-adjacency matrix is always square root of dr dc. And if dr equals dc, this just becomes d. Dr equals dc equals d, this just becomes d. Here, we're saying that the second largest singular value is bounded by square root of dr minus 1 plus square root of dc minus 1. So what happens if you have a balanced bipartite graph? So that dr is equal to dc equals d. Then both terms are equal and you get back to that. You can see that. So this is a proper definition. Sorry, this definition is a proper generalization of a Ramanujan graph. Well, what about this statement? This statement says that if you take a deregular graph and keep making the number of vertices bigger and bigger, the lim-inf cannot be below this number. Is there an analogous statement for bipartite graphs? And it turns out, yes, there is. This is proven in 1996. So you fix two integers. Earlier we fixed only one number, which was the degree. Here we fixed two integers. And then you let the number of rows, left vertices, number of right vertices increase to infinity. But of course, subject to this condition, because the number of edges leaving one side of the bipartite graph has to be the same as the number of edges arriving on the other side. And what this theorem says is, if both NR and NC are going to infinity, then the second largest singular value, the lim-inf of that is no less than square root of dr minus 1 plus dc minus 1. So, and once again, if dr equals dc equals d, then this bound becomes that. So, Feng-Li theorem is a natural generalization of Allen-Boppner bound. Now, this is a theorem proven in 2008, and this is a real monster. It has a 75-page proof. I don't know how many people actually understand it. What this theorem by Friedman says is that practically every graph is a Ramanujan graph. Simply put, let's give a more precise statement. You take the degree greater than 4, that's just a purely technicality, and you choose some tolerance number which we'll call epsilon. It can be as small as you feel like. Then you take a deregular n-vertex graph formed by d over 2 uniform and independent permutations on n. So, I mean, this part is just making things a little bit clearer. See, suppose we say a random n-vertex graph. Okay, suppose we say that. Well, a random n-vertex graph is not going to be deregular, right? So you can't just choose the edges at random and hope that it is going to be deregular. So all this business here formed by d over 2 uniform and independent permutations, all that is seeing is within the constraint of being d-regular, the graph is totally random. Okay. So the number of these d-regular n-vertex graphs is a finite number. And then what you do is just figure out what fraction of these graphs satisfy the condition of the Ramanujan graph. Namely that the second largest eigenvalue is no larger than 2 into square root of d minus 1. So what Friedman showed is, well, the second largest eigenvalue may or may not be smaller than 2 square root of d minus 1, but it is always smaller than 2 square root of d minus 1 plus epsilon. So that is this little tolerance with a probability that is at least equal to 1 minus of the order of n minus r. Now this probability is a bit misleading because it's not a probability. Especially with Professor Rao sitting in the audience, I have to be very precise about that. All we're talking about is how many such d-regular n-vertex graphs are there and what fraction of them satisfy this property, and we're calling it the probability. So it's more like a frequency rather than a probability. So, but anyway, the point is that the frequency with which this inequality is satisfied approaches 1 as n goes to infinity, because you've got this n to the power of minus r there. And what is r? R is this pretty messy looking number. But anyway, it is positive. Therefore, as n goes to infinity, this goes to 0. So AAS stands for almost asymptotically surely. And sorry, the other way, asymptotically almost surely. So if you want to just state this in an informal way, getting rid of all these complexities, it just says generate a d-regular n-vertex graph at random. It won't satisfy the Ramanujan property, but it will satisfy the Ramanujan property with a tolerance of epsilon. Okay. So even more simply, almost every graph is a Ramanujan graph. Okay. If it is d-regular and is sufficiently big. So, okay, how about Ramanujan bigraphs? Well, you can imagine already for Ramanujan graph, the statement is very messy. So I didn't want to bore you by making the statement for bigraphs. It's even more messy. But in spirit, it says the same as Friedman's theorem from 2008. This is really hot off the press. You can see 2018. If you study DRDC regular graphs with NR, NC vertices and you satisfy this condition, fix the degrees, let the number of vertices blow up to infinity, then this inequality holds with a plus epsilon there, little bit of tolerance plus epsilon, kind of like what we have here. So
sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
There's a question by Professor B.V. Rao. So he asked that in Friedman's theorem, the graphs would have multiple edges.
No. They're all simple, undirected graphs. No self-loops, no directions, and no multi-edges. So these are all simple graphs. So between any pair of vertices, only one edge, if at all, and no directed edges. Okay, Professor Rao?
Thank you.
Okay. So the title for this next slide is a bit of a joke. I said, where are the Ramanujan graphs hiding? Now, what I mean by where are the Ramanujan graphs hiding, I mean that if you just generate a graph at random, it almost satisfies the Ramanujan property with a probability that approaches 1. When I say almost satisfy, because of this epsilon, right? So they are not true Ramanujan graphs, but they are near Ramanujan graphs. Okay. And similarly for bipartite graphs, just generate some graph at random, and it will satisfy that property with the small tolerance epsilon. But you see, saying that randomly generated graphs satisfy this property is not very satisfying, is it? You want a way of constructing them explicitly, as opposed to just do something at random and hope for the best. Okay, point number one. Point number two, we don't want almost Ramanujan property. We want the Ramanujan property. That means we want to get rid of this epsilon. How do we do that? So it turns out, even today, we're in the year 2021, there are just a handful of explicit constructions of Ramanujan graph. See, if you remember, the bound was proved in 1986, 35 years ago. Even today, there are hardly 6 or 7 explicit constructions of Ramanujan graphs. And before us, that is, us being me and one of my PhD students, there was not a single explicit construction of a Ramanujan bigraph. Okay, this is not a very happy situation, right? So we try to remedy that. So now I thought I was going very slowly, but I see my time is slipping away. Okay, let's talk about Ramanujan graphs. So the most popular technique for constructing Ramanujan graph is something called a Cayley graph. So what is a Cayley graph? You start with a group G. I hope people know what a group is. And it doesn't have to be abelian, so it doesn't have to be commutative. And within this group G, you choose a subset S, which is often called the set of generators. And this set S has to have a property called symmetry. What is symmetry? If A is in S, then the inverse of A is also in S. If this is true, we call the set S as symmetric. So what is the Cayley graph of G generated by S? So the vertices are the elements of the group G. And what about the edges? For each element X in G, you take X into XA, where A varies over this generator set S. Okay. So how many such edges are there? Well, as many A's as there are. So that is the cardinality of the set S. Now, the undergraduates in the audience should be able to check very easily. Different choices of A give rise to different edges, right? So you don't get multiple edges between a pair of vertices. Now this is a directed edge. I'm saying from X to XA. However, if you take XA, then XA multiplied by A inverse, that will give you another edge XAX. Now can you multiply by A inverse? Yes, you can, because we assumed that the set of generators is symmetric. Therefore, even though this is a directed edge, for every such directed edge, there is also a directed edge in the opposite direction. So you can forget about the direction, just think of it as an undirected edge. Therefore, even if the group is non-commutative, the Cayley graph is regular, and the degree is just the cardinality of the set of generators and undirected. So here is a baby example for people who want to get the idea. I look at the set of integers modulo 8. Okay, this is a commutative group because addition is commutative. And my set of generators is 3 and 5. Is that symmetric? Yes, because what is the inverse of 3? It's the additive inverse, remember? It's 5. And what's the additive inverse of 5? It's 3. So this is a symmetric set. So what you can do is, for each element, so suppose you take 0. Well, let me show in the picture, it's easy. Just remember, S is 3 and 5. So suppose you start at 0. So you take 0 plus 3, which is that edge, or 0 plus 5, which is this edge, right? Or suppose you take 4. You take 4 plus 3, which is 7, that is that edge, and 4 plus 5. What is 4 plus 5? 4 plus 5 is 9. But we're doing everything mod 8, so 9 is the same as 1, so that is that edge. Okay, so this is what the Cayley graph looks like. And Cayley graphs can be disconnected In this case, it turns out to be a bipartite graph, but all kinds of possibilities exist. Cayley graphs can be disconnected, they can be connected and non-bipartite, connected and bipartite. Okay. It turns out the first Ramanujan graph that was constructed was a Cayley graph. That was in 1988. We'll get to that a little bit later. But here is a negative result due to Friedman, the same guy who proved the earlier theorem. This is Professor Ramamurthy from Queen's University. I don't know where Professor Tillich is. And what they proved is this very interesting result. They showed that if you take any Cayley graph where the underlying group is abelian, then the second largest eigenvalue is greater than or equal to d minus some number which is of the order of d n minus 4 divided by d, where d is the size of the generator set. Okay. So what happens as n goes to infinity? So this, see, d is some number and minus 4 over d is again some positive number. Sorry, 4 over d is a positive number, minus 4 over d is negative, so this piece goes to 0. Therefore, not only does the second largest eigenvalue go right past 2 square root of d minus 1, which is the Ramanujan limit if you remember, in fact it approaches d from below, so it fails to be a Ramanujan graph. So a flip side of this statement is, if G is an abelian group of size n, and D is any specified integer, there are only finitely many Cayley graphs that also have the Ramanujan property. Therefore, if you want to construct Ramanujan graphs with fixed degree D but arbitrarily large n, using the Cayley method, then the underlying group cannot be abelian. Now this quantifier is very important. Okay, this negative result is only about trying to construct Ramanujan graphs using the Cayley construction. But interestingly, till today, nobody has any other way of constructing Ramanujan graphs of arbitrarily large n and fixed d. Okay? Okay, so let's come to this. This is kind of the fun part. This is called the LPS construction. So before that, I'm going to remind you of a little bit of elementary mathematics. Again, for the professors in the audience, this is very, very simple, but I'm assuming there are some students here. So let's start with the, sorry, that's not P, that is Q. Okay, sorry about that. Suppose Q is a prime number. Then f of Q, that is 0, 1 up to Q minus 1, this is a field because if you do addition and multiplication modulo Q, well, it's easy enough to show that you can always do addition and multiplication modulo Q no matter what Q is. It doesn't have to be a prime number. But where do you use the prime number? If you want to find a multiplicative inverse of any of these numbers, that will be the case only if Q is a prime number. So you can add, subtract, and multiply no matter what Q is. But if you also want to divide, then Q has to be a prime number. So that is f of Q. Right? Prime numbers, integers modulo prime number Q. So what is GL of n? So GL stands for general linear group of order n over the field f of Q. So this is just a set of square matrices of size n by n, so that is n, where the elements come from this field f of Q, which is that thing, and the matrices are non-singular. That means the determinant is not 0. And I think people in the audience can easily appreciate, even if they don't know, that all your standard matrix theory works on matrices with elements in a field. So if determinant of M is not equal to 0, then M has an inverse, which is also a matrix in the same field. So this set of all these matrices whose determinant is non-zero, this is called the general linear group of order n. Now we look at something called the projective general linear group. So this is same as GL but with a P in front. So what is that? We will take two different matrices to be the same, denoted by this tilde symbol, or we define two matrices to be equivalent if there is a constant C. By constant I mean a non-zero element of the field such that A is a multiple of B. Okay. Now remember, in the general linear group, right, because of this condition, every A is a left multiple of B if you allow matrix multiplication. And similarly, A is a right multiple of B if you allow matrix multiplication. But we're not doing that. We're insisting that only scalar multiplication. And of course, the scalar can be there or can be there. It doesn't matter. So once you define this equivalence relation and take all the equivalence classes, that is called the projective general linear group. And you can do some simple counting. Don't waste your time reading this formula. It's just, I put it in there more for your interest sake. So here's an explicit formula for how many such matrices there are in GL. And here is a formula for how many equivalence classes there are for in PGL. Now we're going to be interested in the case where n is equal to 2. So you substitute n is equal to 2 into that formula and you get the number of non-singular matrices is q squared minus 1 into q squared minus q. And the number of elements in the projective general linear group of order 2 over f of q is q into q squared minus 1. Okay. Now, this is the famous Libarsky-Phillips-Sarnak construction. How does it go? You choose two prime numbers p, each of which is congruent to 1 mod 4. So the first thing you have to observe is, if you look at this equation, p is equal to a squared, a0 squared plus a1 squared plus a2 squared plus a3 squared. If you restrict a0 to be odd and positive, and a1, a2, a3 to be even numbers, then the number of solutions of this equation is always p plus 1. This follows from the so-called Jacobi identity. So here's a toy illustration. Suppose you take p is equal to 5. Is 5 a prime number? Yes, of course. But is it congruent to 1 mod 4? Yes, of course. So what are the 6 solutions of this equation? Well, you can write 5 as 1 plus 4. So you have to choose a0 to be 1 because a0 is odd and positive. So 1, 1, 1. What about these other numbers? Well, you have 1 plus 4, so either this is 4 or that is 4 or this is 4. So that means a1 is either plus minus 2 or a2 is plus minus 2. And sorry, there's a 0 missing. 1, 0, plus minus 2, comma 0. Sorry about that. Or a3 is plus minus 2. So 2 answers there, 2 answers there, 2 answers here. Total of 6 solutions. And it's a good exercise. Take a number like 17. All right. Then there should be 18 solutions of this equation. So try to find all those solutions. It's fun actually. Then this is the first step of the LPS construction. So the underlying group in the LPS construction is the projective general linear group of order 2 over the field FQ. Then they start with a number I, which is I squared equals minus 1 mod Q. All right. Now I is an element of this FQ. So you can see what I is. I is kind of a proxy for the square root of minus 1, but it is an integer in this field. Now, again, I leave it to you to check that such an I always exists. Okay. So then what you do is you take these solutions and you formulate all these 2 by 2 matrices. So suppose there are p plus 1 solutions and call them 1 through p plus 1. So a0, a1, a2, a3, index them by this j, which is running from 1 to p plus 1. So you take this matrix a0 plus I, a1, A2 plus AI3 minus A2 plus AI3 and A0 minus IA1. And take everything modulo Q, all right? What is the determinant of this matrix? Remember that I squared equals -1. You will easily verify that the determinant is A0 squared plus A1 squared plus A2 squared plus A3 squared, which is P. So all these matrices have a determinant of P, but they're all distinct matrices. So what you do is, you take these matrices. Now this is a matrix in GL, not in PGL, but you can look at its equivalence class. So these are the set S, the generator. This is the underlying group, and you perform the Cayley graph, and they showed that this is a graph of degree P plus 1 with Q into Q squared minus 1 divided by 2 vertices. Thus far, no one has found an elementary proof of this. I keep thinking somebody somewhere should find an elementary proof, because this is a statement about the eigenvalues of matrices. So the engineer in me says someone should be able to find an elementary proof, but thus far no one has found. So it turns out these graphs have two different types of structure. If you can write P as a square modulo Q, this is called a quadratic residue, then the resulting Cayley graph is disconnected and in two pieces. If it is not a quadratic residue, it becomes a balanced bipartite graph. Okay. So here are two examples. P equals 37 and Q equals 13. If you do this calculation, the resultant graph looks like this. So this is a bipartite graph. If you have really good eyes, you can count the number of dots in any row. How many dots do you think you will get? If you have been paying attention, you will know that each row contains precisely P plus 1 equals 38 dots. Okay. And the size of the graph is Q into Q squared 1 minus 1 divided by 2. Okay. So it's 1092. Each piece has 1092 vertices. Total 88 vertices. This is not a quadratic residue. Now you take P is equal to 257 and Q equals 17, and you can easily check the 36 is congruent to 257 mod 17. So this P is a quadratic residue, so the graph is disconnected. Okay. So the next question is, we could show, is this graph the same as that graph? Do you understand the question? What Libarsky, Phillips, and Sarnak showed was, the whole thing is a Ramanujan graph. So this graph is a Ramanujan graph, and this graph is a Ramanujan graph. So it's interesting to say, yeah, but is this the same as that graph, maybe with the edges and vertices permuted? And it turns out the answer is yes. So we could show that. So even though it looks like you have two Ramanujan graphs, actually you have only one. Now I'm just going to stop sharing this. I'm going to show you a MATLAB window to show you how you actually compute these Ramanujan graphs. Okay. So let's stop this thing and share application window. I hope, yeah, there's MATLAB. So clear all. Okay, fine. I should. Okay. I don't. Somewhere I should be able to set the font. Where are preferences? I'm sorry, I should have done this before. Okay. Where is the font size? There it is, fonts. Okay. I'm going to set the font size to 18. Okay. Okay, can you see this clearly now? It says LPS Ramanujan. So this is a MATLAB code which I'm running. So this is written by my former student, and this is in MATLAB. We also have a Python implementation if somebody is interested. So it says enter the value of P. So we'll enter 37, okay? Enter the value of Q. We'll enter 13. And in fact, let's do something we haven't seen. Let's enter 17 just for the heck of it. So you see, it takes 2.04 seconds, next to nothing. So that is the graph. Can you see? The degree is 38.
No, we cannot.
Okay, anybody have a question?
No, we cannot see the graph.
Cannot see the graph. Why can't you see the graph?
No.
Okay, that's funny. Stop sharing. I have to, oh, okay. I think I have to share a different window. All right, let's see. Right, it was only showing the, it was only sharing the MATLAB. Okay, share screen and application window. Yes. Okay, there we go. Now you should be able to see it, right? So that's the graph. So the point I'm trying to make is, this is something that of interest to engineers, maybe not to mathematicians. It's not enough just to prove theorems. You also have to be able to compute things. And so we pay a lot of attention to that. Okay. So now I'm sort of out of time, so which is what I was afraid of. So let me just talk about the construction of Ramanujan bigraphs. And I will not actually talk about matrix completion. I will be happy to mail this slide to anybody who wants them. But I will talk about this last item, which is called fault-tolerant Ramanujan graph, because it's kind of a fun problem. So let me just spend a few minutes talking about construction of Ramanujan bigraph. So remember what I mentioned in the beginning. There are not even 5 or 6 explicit constructions of Ramanujan graph. I showed you the LPS construction, which is the only known construction with finite degree and number of vertices going to infinity. But for Ramanujan bipartite graph, there hasn't been even one. So my student and I constructed this matrix, which is the biadjacency matrix. You take a prime number Q and you do the right shift modulo Q, call that matrix P, and you form this matrix. So this matrix has, how many rows does it have? Each one of these is Q by Q matrix, and this counter is starting from 0 to L. So this is an LQ by Q squared matrix, and this is Q by L biregular. So what we showed is that this matrix, in fact, is the biadjacency matrix of a Ramanujan bigraph. In particular, if you take L is equal to Q, you get a square matrix, and you get a new class of Ramanujan graph. This holds when L is smaller than Q. When L is greater than Q, the same statement also holds good. Okay, so we're kind of proud of this because people define Ramanujan bipartite graph, but nobody gave you a concrete example of zeros and ones. Okay, so this is the first such construction. So let me now quickly jump ahead to fault-tolerant Ramanujan graphs. And if there is interest, I'll talk about matrix completion problem. Okay. So what is a fault-tolerant Ramanujan graph? So these first 2 sentences won't make any sense to you because I haven't told you what the matrix completion problem is. But we can start with this bullet. Okay. Suppose you have a Ramanujan bigraph. So I choose omega to be the edge set of the Ramanujan bigraph. Now there is a specified matrix M, which is a binary matrix of size m by n. So same size as the edge set of the Ramanujan graph. And the condition here is you cannot choose any edge in M as a part of your Ramanujan bigraph. So call this the set of prohibited edges. Okay. So the question here is, if I give you a set of prohibited edges and I ask you, can you construct a Ramanujan bigraph that does not contain any edges from this matrix M? Okay. So to put it another way, suppose you just construct a Ramanujan bigraph any old way. See, we have the world's only construction of an explicit Ramanujan bigraph, but I'm saying that here we don't care how you have constructed it. Suppose you have somehow constructed it, and if it so happens that none of the edges in the graph you constructed is prohibited, well and good, you've solved the problem. But suppose, unfortunately, some of the edges you generated happen to fall in this set. Can you perturb the original Ramanujan graph so that you avoid these prohibited edges, such that it still remains a Ramanujan, it should be actually bigraph, such that it still remains a Ramanujan bigraph with the same degree? Now, there's a very interesting construction. I won't go into the construction because it's kind of intricate, but the statement is very simple. Suppose that every row and every column, okay, that's obvious, C-O-L-U-M-N, every row and every column of M has no more than P entries of 1. So that means for every left vertex, the number of band right edges is no more than P. For every right vertex, the number of band left edges is no more than P. And you just generate the biadjacency matrix of the Ramanujan graph. And you compute this integer called theta, which is the maximum inner product between any two columns. And you can change this to rows, it doesn't make any difference. Then you can perturb the Ramanujan bigraph, provided that 2P, remember P is the maximum number of forbidden edges in any row or any column, that is no larger than N minus dr and dc minus theta c. Okay, so as I said, if you don't go to the construction, this looks like magic, but the bottom line is you look at it this way. You can take any given Ramanujan bigraph and take any set of forbidden edges, provided there are not too many of them in any one row or any one column, then you can always perturb the Ramanujan graph. Okay, what are some interesting research questions? Is this bound tight? I mean, it works, but is there a reason why this should be the bound and not something else? No answer as to that. So I just wanted to thank a couple of my collaborators. The guy on the left is Shantanu Prasad Burnwal, who did most of the, in fact, he did all of the work I talked about in this talk. It's his PhD thesis. He just submitted it, and I suppose will be defending it successfully very shortly. The last part of the talk about the fault-tolerant Ramanujan graphs, that thing there, that was joint work with Professor Kaninika Sinha, who's in the mathematics department at IISER Pune, and she gave one of the earlier Ganit Swara lectures on the circle method. Now I will leave it up to the organizers whether they want me to talk about the matrix completion problem or not. It would take about 8 to 10 minutes. The choice is yours entirely. And I'm happy either way.
You can take your time.
You want me to talk about it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so let me talk about the matrix completion problem. So suppose you have an unknown matrix. Let's call it X. And you have an upper bound R on its rank. But that's the only thing you know about this matrix, nothing more. So we want to sample this matrix. That's why I use the symbol S. And you measure those and complete the remaining element. Can you do that? Okay, why does this question even make sense? So let me give you a very, very toy example. Suppose M is equal to 2, N is equal to 2, at R is equal to 1. Okay. So you have a 2 by 2 matrix with rank 1. Isn't it obvious that if I measure 3 of the 4 elements, I know what the 4th one is, right? Simple algebraic relationship. But the problem is that logic gets harder and harder as the matrices become bigger and bigger and integer R becomes larger and larger. So the question is, can you measure some small number of elements of X and fill up the remaining entries? Now, this has a lot of applications in engineering. So we actually, Shantanu and I, we started with applications and then stumbled on the fact that Ramanujan graphs are a good way to solve this problem. So we are engineers, so we didn't start with Ramanujan graphs and then look for engineering applications. We started with this problem and discovered that Ramanujan graphs are a way to solve the problem. Anyway, so how do we do this? Well, you see, you have measured these elements in the set omega. Remember, omega is the sample set where you're measuring the unknown matrix. So you can say, all right, I'm just going to look for all matrices that are consistent with the measurements. So Zij equals Xij wherever I have measured the matrix, and I minimize the rank. Well, this problem, unfortunately, is NP-hard. NP-hard basically means there is no known polynomial time algorithm for solving this problem, nor is there likely to be. So basically, you can forget about solving this problem. So what do we do then? So you change the rank to something else which is a bit easier to cope with, and that is called the convex relaxation. So the convex relaxation is the largest convex function that is everywhere dominated by the function of interest to you. And it turns out the convex relaxation of the rank is the so-called nuclear norm, which is the sum of the similar values of the matrix. Now, this problem is very easy to solve. If you know anything about optimization, you have a convex cost function, you have linear constraint, so you can solve this problem very easily for quite large matrices. But that doesn't help you much. You don't want to solve this problem, you want to solve that problem. So you ask, okay, by solving this problem, have I also found an answer to that problem? Well, obviously not always, because if you could always solve this problem by converting it to a convex optimization problem, then this wouldn't be NP-hard. Therefore, the solution of this problem will not always equal the solution of that problem. But does it sometimes? Yes, of course. That's what we're trying to answer. So it turns out, and I thought a lot about how to present the solution. It's a big mess. But basically the idea is, how do you choose the sample set? So you are given the size of the matrix. Say X is an M by N matrix. So you construct a bipartite Ramanujan graph with at least M vertices on one side, at least N vertices on the other side, and then you choose the degrees of this biregular Ramanujan graph in such a way that a very messy looking condition is satisfied. And then from these samples which have come from the edge set of the Ramanujan graph, you understand this part here, you sample an element if and only if the row vertex Vi is connected to the column vertex Vj in this bipartite graph. Then you solve the nuclear norm minimization problem, which you can do very easily. Then, under suitable conditions, the solution to the nuclear norm minimization problem, this one, is in fact the solution to the original problem of completing the matrix. So this is the first result on matrix completion using a deterministic sampling pattern. Nobody else had done this before. Everybody else was just picking elements at random and hoping for the best. Now it turns out this condition is very bad. It turns out that the degree of the Ramanujan graph has to be roughly the cube of the rank. So flip this around, what is the maximum rank you can recover? It's approximately the cube root of the degree. So that's not very satisfactory. So what we did was we actually generated low rank matrices at random, sorry, not matrices, just matrices. And we found that actually you can recover up to 1/3 of the degree. The rank can go up to this level. So this technique of nuclear norm minimization to complete matrices is very, very practically useful. But this is only through simulation, and there are no proofs as yet. And that's where we stand. I'll just talk about these two items, and then my talk is over. So the motivation for the fault-tolerant Ramanujan graphs was, it says, okay, choose the sampling set to be the edge set of a Ramanujan pi graph. But in actual applications, what happens is, the unknown matrix X also has missing element. So you can't just sample this location and you may get the answer back. Well, you can't measure that because it's missing. So that's the motivation for this result. Okay, so that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
So I'm going to allow the audience to unmute themselves and ask any questions that they may have. Yes. So
yeah, just one question.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this Friedman's theorem is in some sense a probabilistic theorem. Almost all graphs are Ramanujan. This fault tolerance, is it in some sense a topological one?
Yeah, it is. It is sort of.
Topological analog?
You're right. It is a kind of a topological theorem. So let me just bring that back up again. I closed it, but I can bring it back again. So there are m by n matrices. So the total number of entries in this matrix is m times n. And if you look at these numbers, okay, so what is, forget the 2 for a minute, what is the ratio of p divided by the total number of entries? So it's basically telling you that the fraction of missing entries has to be relatively small compared with the size of the matrix. So in that sense, it is topological. But what is interesting though is that the actual location of these missing entries is totally irrelevant. It's just how many of them there are. So that is both a strength and a weakness. Okay. It is a strength because it says we don't care where these missing entries are. But it is a weakness because it says even if you knew, you can't take advantage of that information. The actual connectivity is not anywhere reflected in this bound.
Right.
And then, so the question that I mentioned earlier, I'll just repeat it again. Is this bound tight? For example, given any Ramanujan bigraph, can you find a suitable matrix M such that you cannot go above this? We don't know.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So maybe I'll ask a question that I have.
Okay.
So what techniques did they use to prove the LPS construction?
So it is actually some very deep theorem due to Pierre Deligne, which is a proof of some conjecture of Ramanujan, which is why Liborsky, Phillips, and Sarnak called them Ramanujan graphs. I will just see if I can't open that paper, if you're willing to bear with me. And then they mention which precise conjecture they used. Yeah, okay. Unfortunately, this is not a searchable PDF. It is a scan. Okay. Let me see if I can find. So they talk about, let me see which paper they're talking about here. No, they don't actually mention this thing here. Yeah, I think I'm going to get out of this one because unfortunately, I don't know which particular conjecture of Ramanujan proved by Deligne they used to show that these are Ramanujan graphs. So, but they chose that name because of that connection. And then there's a very nice survey paper by Professor Ramamurthy, where he actually explains where it makes sense to call this Ramanujan graph. Let me see if I can find that one for a second. Yeah, so 1 second, please. So I'm going to try and share this one so that you can at least see it. So this is a paper. I'll try to make the font a little bit bigger. This is a paper called Ramanujan Graphs and Zeta Functions by Maruti Ramamurthy. And he explains actually the connection. Let me just search for Deligne. No, it's not there. Okay, let's look at Ramanujan. It's not here either. Okay, anyway, but this paper explains, even though he doesn't have the word Ramanujan or Deligne in this paper, why these kinds of graphs should be called Ramanujan graphs. Okay, and this is a paper he wrote in 2005, and it's for a conference in Hyderabad. It's almost impossible to get a hold of, but after I told him that I can't find this paper, he actually put it on his website. He's at Queen's University. That's a nice paper to read. It's at a very, very elementary level, not at a very advanced level. Anybody else have a question?
I have a few more questions, but let's see if anyone from the audience is willing to.
As you want. I think the audience has gone into quiet mode. At least they're still here. I'm happy about that at least.
Very nice talk.
Sorry?
Very nice talk. The audience would be here all the time.
Oh, thank you. Wasn't it too elementary for you?
Absolutely not. I did not know many things.
Very nice of you to say.
So you've mentioned the Allen-Bopanna limit, which says that the limit is bigger than or equal to 2 square root of d minus 1. Does that not mean that the number of Ramanujan graphs of d-regular Ramanujan graphs are finite?
No, not at all. So this is the Allen-Bopanna bound. So the point is that you can let n go to infinity, and you can. So Ljubatsky-Phillips-Sarnak is still today the only infinite family where n goes to infinity, but d remains finite. Now, if you allow d also to go to infinity as n goes to infinity, then there are about half a dozen other such constructs. But the finiteness of Ramanujan graphs is Ramamurthy's result, which says that if you take a Cayley graph where the underlying group is abelian, then there are only finitely many Ramanujan. But in the LPS construction, it's a Cayley graph, but the underlying group is the projective general linear group, which is not commutative. So in some ways, you can sort of think of that as the secret, how they can get away with increasing the size of the graph while keeping the degree fixed.
Also, the last theorem that you mentioned, who is it due to on fault
Oh,
tolerance?
that's Shantanu. That's my PhD student. That's from his PhD thesis, and on that particular theorem, Professor Kanika Sinha also contributed. But the earlier stuff on the construction of the Ramanujan graphs, Ramanujan bipartite graphs, and the proof that by solving nuclear norm minimization, you can recover the unknown matrix exactly, that's all done by Shantanu.
So what is sort of like the time complexity required to construct Ramanujan graphs in the constructions that exist currently?
All except one are very easy. That's why I showed you that MATLAB window. That took 2 seconds.
Right.
Okay. There's one construction due to Winnie Lee, which is not practical at all. Now, she's a great mathematician, so I have to say that with some amount of hesitation. Her construction requires that you take a field, f of q, where q is a prime number or a prime power, and then you find a primitive element. That means one element such that if you keep raising it to successive powers, you get all the non-zero elements of the field. And once you find this primitive element, then her construction goes on. Well, the sad truth is, as of today, there is no polynomial time algorithm for finding a primitive element. So that one is not practical. But all others are dead easy. In fact, even for this LPS construction, you may say, why did you stop at 17? It's not speed, it's storage. Okay, in other words, my humble laptop will run out of storage if I take Q, maybe not 17 but 29, which is the next prime number which is congruent to 1 mod 4. Speed is absolutely fast. As you saw, that code was also written by Shantanu, by the way. It just takes a couple of seconds. So time complexity is absolutely fine. And then our construction for the unbalanced, you don't even have to do any construction. You just write it down. In the sense the, let's just see here. Where is, yeah. So in our construction, so this is just a matrix of zeros and ones. You can literally write it down. You don't have to do anything. So the time complexity is essentially negligible. And that's why we call it a direct construction. You really literally don't have to do any computations whatsoever.
And what techniques did you use to show the construction of the Ramanujan bigraph? Prove that it works?
Well, I make the joke that, see, we didn't have any fancy techniques at our disposal. We didn't have any fancy techniques at our disposal. So we just directly computed the singular values. So you see, this theorem is not just saying it's a Ramanujan bipartite graph. It actually tells you what the singular values are. There's one singular value of square root of LQ, because L is the left degree, Q is the right degree. So you know that the largest singular value is square root of LQ. The other ones are square root of Q, that many of them, and then a whole bunch of singular values of 0. So we just directly computed the singular values. And if L is greater than Q, you get a slightly more complicated formula. But the fact is you still have a closed form formula for what are all the singular values of that matrix. Okay. So in some ways, this is also a bit more satisfactory because instead of just showing that these are Ramanujan bigraphs, we actually compute the singular values.
Sorry, Professor Viviro, were you about to ask?
No, I just about to ask. So Ramanujan graphs are the best expanders, is it?
Someone couldn't understand it. Can you just repeat?
Yeah, is it in some sense Ramanujan graphs are the best expanders? Is it?
They are the best expanders in a certain specific sense. Essentially, if you divide the graph into two pieces, okay,
Right.
and you try to minimize the common boundary between the two pieces,
Correct. Yeah.
then the Ramanujan graphs have the smallest intersection
Right.
between the two pieces, smallest overlap. But I have to tell you something, and I've told this to all the mathematicians who talk about expander graphs, which is that in computer science, there is a very different notion of expander graphs. And in that setting, Ramanujan graphs aren't very good expanders. So, so I've written a book on compressed sensing, in which I talk about Ramanujan graphs, but also this alternate notion of expander graphs, which is more prevalent in computer science, and that is basically one side being smaller, the other side being bigger. That book is going to be published. It has already been published by SIAM, but I've also given the rights to Hindustan Book Agency, so there should be a very affordable Indian edition anytime soon.
What's
So
the
there
title of the book?
Oh, it's just called An Introduction to Compressed Sensing.
Oh. Right.
Maybe since I'm happily sharing all kinds of things, let me just show you one more. I'll just show you the title of this book. Okay, can you see this?
No.
So that's the.
You have to exit the earlier share screen and share this.
No, this is I should be. Okay, I thought I was sharing this window, but maybe not. Let's try again. Application window. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so this is the book, An Introduction to Compressed Sensing.
I see.
And I sent it in August 2019, as you can see.
Right.
And it came out a few months later, and the Indian version should be out literally any day now.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, don't pirate it. I think it's going to come out for 300-400 rupees. So
Sure.
it's not worth your while to pirate it.
Right.
So, are there any practical applications of Ramanujan graphs?
There are, there are lots of practical applications of matrix completion. So if this had been an engineering audience and not a mathematics audience, I would have started with applications first. Okay. So if you rephrase your question and ask, are there any applications of Ramanujan graphs outside the matrix completion problem? No. And let me just repeat what I said earlier. See, when Shantanu and I started working, we didn't care about Ramanujan graph. We wanted to solve the matrix completion problem. But that has a lot of engineering applications. Then we discovered that Ramanujan graphs are a good way of solving the matrix completion problem. And that's why the only deterministic way of solving it. No other deterministic way, that's all. Okay. Everything else is just sample at random and hope for the best. I mean, that's not a solution in my opinion. Okay. So in that sense, yeah, Ramanujan graphs have some applications, but it will be interesting to find others, I think. There is another one which people in the number theory world keep talking about, which is about random walks on graphs. Okay. And it's not entirely clear whether that has a clear engineering application or not. But if we can find one, that could be one more application of Ramanujan graphs. So Ramanujan graphs have the fastest mixing rate amongst all Markov processes on graphs. But then you see, to prove that kind of a theorem, you don't need deregularity, you don't need anything. So I'm a little bit reluctant to call it an application of Ramanujan graphs. It's just a property of Markov processes. So I was telling Professor Sinha day before yesterday that if I talk about random walks on a graphs, nobody will come. But if I call it the page rank algorithm, which is what it is, then everybody will come. So packaging is very important.
But there are applications to pseudo randomness, right? Of
Of
expanders.
Ramanujan graphs?
Are there applications of expander graphs and Ramanujan graphs to pseudo randomness?
Oh, yeah. The other paper I was telling Professor Rao about the non-Ramanujan notion of expander, which I do talk about in my book, that is specifically for generating pseudo-random sequences. But they're unbalanced bipartite graphs. So the notion of expansion there is very different.
So in the matrix completion problem, are there any conditions on the missing edges? Are there like results which say that, you know, if the missing edges, sorry.
Well, you have a rank. You have
sorry.
Upper bound. That's what makes the problem manageable. See, the entries can't be just any old thing. Suppose you have a 1000 by 1000 matrix of rank 10.
Sorry, I was about to ask about the perturbation problem that you mentioned. That is different problem,
yeah, the
right?
perturbation
Where you have
problem
Ramanujan
comes because suppose the Ramanujan graph says, okay, you sample row 46, column 22, and that element is missing when you actually go to measure it. So you can't use that. So you have to perturb the Ramanujan graph so that this element is not a part of the edge set, but it still remains a Ramanujan graph. So that's the genesis of that problem.
But there should be some conditions, right? Because you cannot just say that all elements are
missing.
No.
That's what this P is. That's what this P is all about. That the condition is just how many of them there are. This was Professor Rao's question earlier, that this is a kind of a topological constraint on how many missing elements then can be. And what my answer to him, which I'll repeat again, is that we're doing a simple count of in each row, in each column, how many are missing. And even if you have more detailed information available, we are not taking advantage of it. So that's good news and bad news both.
Right. So I'll just wait and see if the audience has any further questions. Else, I have like some final questions to ask.
Hello?
Yeah, hello.
If you take a matrix, then you can have an element of the tensor product. And then there is concept of quantum entanglement, you know, and the Schmidt rank. Schmidt rank of this entanglement is same as the rank of the corresponding matrix. So that way, this matrix completion has applications to quantum information theory.
Yes, absolutely right. That one of the applications of matrix completion problem is quantum tomography. And also there's something called the sensor placement problem. Then there's image compression. Those are all the engineering applications. And interestingly, the quantum entanglement problem that Professor Singh is talking about, this is now the de facto go-to technique, apparently. I don't know enough about that problem. But one of my friends is running a startup in Silicon Valley. Now, don't get the wrong idea. He's my age, so he's not a young kid trying to build a startup. But anyway, so he says that matrix completion is just about the only effective way they can solve quantum tomography problems. Okay. I don't understand it. But in my book, I give the references to his work, so you can look that up.
Thank you for the amazing, illuminating talk.
Okay, nice to see you again. So what was your last question?
So I would like to ask what suggestions. So you come from an engineering world and you have done tremendous work in engineering and mathematics. So this question is for students who might be thinking of engineering students who might be thinking of getting into math and pure math, and also what would be your advice to them how to approach math, and possibly also how okay, and then there's a second follow-up question to this.
Well, let me just see. Okay, so no, see, first of all, the distinction between pure maths and applied maths and what I like to call theoretical engineering, that's what I do. See, when I was a PhD student more than 50 years ago, applied mathematics basically meant a very limited set of topics like wave propagation, things like that. Today, almost everything we do, you can call it applied mathematics or you can call it theoretical engineering, and I much prefer that phrase, theoretical engineering. And by and large, most pure mathematics courses don't teach any applications at all. So when an engineering student takes a pure maths course, oftentimes they come away a little bit discouraged because they don't see where they can use all this stuff. So I think if the courses are taught in a pure way, but some people like me are asked to give a few lectures just to show that all this stuff does actually have practical applications, then I think the receptivity of the students would be higher. For students, I would say definitely you cannot know too much mathematics. There's no such thing. The more maths you know, the better off you are. Okay, that goes without saying. So my approach to learning mathematics has been, I just pick up the basics of various subjects. I don't know any great subject in much detail, but I try to find out what is the subject about, so that later on when I am working on an engineering problem, then I say, aha, it looks like that branch of mathematics. Let's go and look it up, and maybe we can find something there we can use. The other point I want to make is to the engineers out there, if you think that you can just look up in some mathematics book and the answer to your problem will be right there waiting for you, no, it's not going to happen. Okay, the mathematics book is just a starting point for you to work out the answer. Okay? You don't look up answers, you work out answers, and that's the key point that people need to remember. Okay, but if you don't know the mathematics, you can't even work out the answer. That's why you learn mathematics.
Thank you for your answer. The second question is how much of cutting edge math is used in cutting edge technology?
How much of cutting edge math is using?
Cutting edge technology, really upcoming technology. How this is like, often there's this idea that not a lot of math maybe is used, or maybe the current day research probably is applied few decades later. So
I'm not sure about few decades. I think that's overly pessimistic. See, you have to have curiosity-driven research, because you can't ever actually, I mean, as somebody once said, and this is not a joke, it's actually true. He said, only 5% of the research we do is useful. But the problem is we don't know which 5% that is. Okay, so and that's absolutely literally the truth. So the mathematicians keep publishing papers. Oftentimes there's curiosity-driven research. Now a little bit more of collaboration, like Professor Sinha got interested in Ramanujan graphs applied to engineering, because we basically sought her out and asked her some very fundamental questions about Ramanujan graphs. So some of that is happening. But the gap between cutting edge engineering technology and cutting edge mathematics can be as little as 6 months. It can be as much as 50 years, and you can't tell which is which. And don't forget also, in engineering, there's a big life cycle. In other words, if today fellows like me come out with some technique that works on a sheet of paper, for someone to implement it on a supercomputer, then reduce the memory and computational requirement so that it fits on a cell phone. All this takes time too. So it's not that something is done today and tomorrow it's on your cell phone. It doesn't work like that. So there's an entire value chain, and I think people have a place at different points on this value chain. So as a student, what you should do is to figure out where on this value chain you'd like to be and equip yourself to be there. That's what I would advise.
Thank you. Can you say that mathematics is technology?
Mathematics is not technology. Theoretical engineering is also not technology. But much of technology wouldn't be possible without mathematics or theoretical engineering. I will say that very unambiguously.
And one final question, which is, can you mention some references for your talk?
Oh, they're all on my website. I mean, I'll just give you a link to my research page. All these things are there.
And also, if a student wants to begin learning about Ramanujan graphs, what might be a good reference?
Well, it depends on at what level he wants to learn. I mean, there is a book by Peter Sarnak and a couple of others. I don't remember their names now. I'll just tell you. There's a book by there's a book by Davidoff, Sarnak, and Vallet, which is called Ramanujan Graphs, and it's fairly complete, except that a couple of important number theoretic parts they omit. So that is a book only on Ramanujan graphs. If you want to know just about enough Ramanujan graphs to understand what I'm talking about, my book is also self-contained, but it doesn't go beyond what I've talked about today. Whereas Davidoff Sarnak Vallet book goes much farther.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Vidyasagar, for this wonderful talk.
Yeah, Professor Singh has said something. For applications to quantum information theory, papers by Nikhil Srivastava. Yes, that's right. There are three people who work together, Marcus, Spielman, and Srivastava. They have written some papers on Ramanujan graphs, and one of their motivation is quantum information theory. There's another, and Cardassian-Singer conjecture. So yeah, that's another good, nice line for people to go into.
Thank you.
There seems to be somebody by Professor Dev with elementary number theory and Ramanujan graph. I don't know about this book. Okay, I'll look for it. I'll look it up.
This is the book that I just shared. You mentioned about Sarnak's book, Sarnak, Davidoff, and Vallet. Yeah. So I just shared it in the link. I think there are no other questions. Then let us thank Professor Vidyasagar again for this wonderful talk and for taking so many questions. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Good luck to everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
So I'm going to stop the recording now.